Hello everyone, hi! So today let's talk about the literature courses that I'll be taking while I'm here in France. So for context, I'm in my third semester of studying comparative literature, originally at the University of Vienna in Austria, which is where I'm from. But I'm currently doing a semester abroad, so I'm in Paris at the University of Sorbonne Nouvelle. So obviously that's very exciting for me. And I'll just talk you through the 9 courses that I've chosen to do this semester. So let's get right into it. Oh, actually, before we get into it, if you're enjoying these videos or you're getting some value out of them, please consider supporting the channel financially. I always leave my Ko-fi account as the first link in the description box below. Thank you to everyone who has already gotten me a coffee. It's incredibly generous and it really helps me to keep this channel going, as I'm not doing any sponsorships or anything like that. Okay, now let's get into the courses. So the first course I want to talk about is called Les Savoirs Imaginaires. So that would translate to imaginary knowledge, which is a very intriguing course. I've talked a little bit about it in my vlog of the first week at uni, and my professor, she's a great inspiration to me, has talked to us about the fact that she thinks that the distinction between knowledge on the one hand and imagination on the other hand might not after all be so clear. So she said that in this course she wants to break up that dichotomy and show that knowledge can indeed be fiction, and fiction or imaginations or dreams can indeed be knowledge. So it's about the relationship between those two terms. And we'll have to read a book by Bernard Werber, which is one of the greatest science fiction authors of French literature. And the book is called Nouvelle Encyclopédie de Savoir Relatif et Absolu. So the new encyclopedia of relative and absolute knowledge. We spent a little bit of time talking about how even some of the greatest scientists have conceived of their ideas originally in dreams or in their imagination, and then they went out to prove it because they had an intuition. We also talked about concepts of truth and how we're still nowadays sort of living with the Aristotelian definition of truth, that something that is true has no contradictions, which really doesn't hold a lot of water given the fact that humans are full of contradictions. So I'm very curious what's still to come. You bet I'm gonna make a video at the end of the semester about everything I've learned, and I think in this course I'm gonna learn a lot that is gonna make it into this video. So the second course I'm taking is called Paris in French Cinema. It is a course about the history of French cinema and how it has sort of 2 origins or 2 beginnings. You have on the one hand the Lumière brothers, who started making films and really cared about depicting reality as it is. So their first movies, you might have seen them, are called, I think, Arrival of a Train and Women Leaving the Factory or something. And it's exactly that. It's a very normal everyday scene of just a train riding into the station and women walking out of the factory. The Lumière brothers, as I said, they were all about observation and realism in that sense. Whereas Méliès, who started making movies around the same time, was all about visual effects and transporting the audience into another world. So those 2 origins, you can even still see them today, and they have developed into more of documentaries on the one hand, so depicting life as it is, and fictional stories on the other hand. So the question when you watch something is always, do you want to learn something about the real world, or do you want to escape it for a while, right? And then you gravitate towards either one of those 2 genres. I just found that quite illuminating to learn, because I feel like even with my videos, I'm always torn between the 2, which one I want it to be. So yeah, that was the beginning of the course, and every week we're just moving up the timeline, looking at different bits of movies that have been made throughout the past 130 years. Obviously, the movies we're watching always have a bit of Paris in it, and we're connecting it with some historical events and yeah, just how the medium has developed. So far, it's fun. Film is still not really my medium, but I thought I cannot spend a semester in Paris and not learn anything about movies, right? It's so iconic. So I'm really looking forward to also going to some of those cinemas and watching some old movies. I'll do that, and maybe I'll warm up to movies finally or something. Let's see. Third course has the name L'Esprit des Machines, which would translate to the spirit of machines. It's a first year course, so I'm sitting in there with mostly students who have just started studying literature, which is lovely because it gives me a little bit of a feeling of, oh, I already know some of those things the professor is saying, you know, whereas in basically all the other courses I'm like scrambling to keep up. In this one, I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage. I've already read Frankenstein, which is one of the books on the syllabus. The other one is Blade Runner by Philip K. Dick, which I haven't read yet, but I'm looking forward to. So the main questions of this course are whether artificial intelligence can have humanity and or a soul, and how that has been explored in literature. So just the humanity of machines and what it actually means to create something, and also a little bit the limits of technology. If you're interested in Frankenstein, which is still one of my favorite books of all time, I have made a video about it. I think it was the first book video here on this channel. I can link it here in the cards. And I've actually made that connection to artificial intelligence. So yeah, in the beginning I thought, oh, I already know that. I've already read Frankenstein. I've thought about it deeply. But as soon as we started talking about it, I realized that it's such a rich and endlessly revealing work that is so interesting stylistically that, yeah, I'm really down to get into it all over again. In the first lesson, we started with looking at Ovid's Metamorphoses. There's this myth of, oh my god, what's his name? I don't know, I'll put it on the screen. Who basically creates a statue and falls in love with it. So he falls in love with his own piece of art, and then she actually becomes alive. And I think we started with that because it's like the oldest account of something like that written down. But man, reading Ovid's Metamorphoses in French, you know, I've never read it before, and it's already a quite challenging text, and then to like read it in French and answer questions about it, I felt thrown in the deep end with that one, but it was fine. It's gonna be fine. So besides those two main works that I've mentioned, we're just gonna read through excerpts of different texts in class, talk about them, and yeah, work through it every week. I really love that the professor printed out all the texts for us up front, so I have it in a neat package and I can already flip through it a little bit. Some things I definitely recognized immediately, like E.T.A. Hoffmann and a text from Schiller. So very curious what's still to come with that one. The fourth course is called Écrire avec un accent, writing with an accent. And this course is all about the role of language in literature, as in the language that the author speaks. So we're looking at how different authors have experimented with, for example, mixing the different languages they speak in their books. We're also talking about accents and the fact that everyone has an accent. It just depends on your point of view, like where you're from. You know, to me, people in the south of Austria, they have an accent and I don't. But to them, I have an accent and they don't. And what's lovely about this course is that the professor, she's still really young. I mean, at least she looks pretty young. And she's from America and has lived in France for quite some years. And her French is absolutely perfect in terms of vocabulary. but she has first-hand experience of what it's like to have an accent and to be made aware of that all the time. So even though she has written her PhD thesis in French and she's teaching at a French university in French, she still hasn't lost her accent. So besides the theoretical part of the course, she really cares about us examining our relationship with the languages that we speak. So there's going to be quite some creative writing projects in this course as well, which I find such a lovely combination. I'm really happy about that. In the first course already, we had to draw a portrait linguistique, so a linguistic portrait of ourselves. So we had to draw our body and then put the languages or accents we speak in different colors on different parts of our bodies, depending on what we associate with them. And then we wrote down some words that we associate with each one of those languages, and we spent some time thinking about how they interrelate. I loved that because I speak a lot of languages, and I spend a lot of time thinking about which language I use to do what or to think about what. I've never taken the time to write all of that down, so it just feels very clarifying. Again, really curious to see what's still to come in this course. Course number 5 is called Poétique du corps souffrant. So the poetry of the suffering body, or poetics of the suffering body, which is about the suffering body in literature. And our professor said right in the beginning that he's not gonna play into that Cartesian dualism between mind and body, because again, according to him, those two are not easily distinguished. So far we looked a little bit at the history of suffering. So we started with the Stoics and how they saw suffering, and then we just went up the timeline over Montaigne, Baudelaire up to Houellebecq, and just read some excerpts where they explain their view on suffering and the question that seems to arise again and again of whether suffering is the origin of poetic expression. So again, we're going through different text excerpts together, and soon everyone will have to do an exposé, so a little presentation in front of the class where a work of art or literature is presented, where suffering is in the center of it. It's kind of a heavy course because everything from eating disorders to self-harm just falls under that umbrella of suffering. I'm personally probably gonna do my exposé on A Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka. Number 6, maybe, possibly my favorite course. It's called Philosophie, Sciences Humaines et Société Française. So French philosophy, human sciences and society. So you're gonna see me rave about this course a lot, I think. The professor is a philosopher and linguist who has studied comparative literature in his youth. He says that his main interest is the relationship between philosophy and literature, because often in philosophy there's that belief that the language doesn't really matter, it's just about the ideas that are conveyed, right? Language is just a utilitarian thing to convey your message. And he says that no, actually the language and the words we choose have an incredible impact on whatever is delivered. And I don't know, like everything he said and what he has done in his life, I was like, I want to be that. Like when I am 50 or 60, I want to be able to say that I'm a philosopher and linguist and I studied comparative literature. I could listen to that person forever. You know, he has that kind of refined thinking and humility that you can only reach with age. And everything he talks about is just very captivating. So yeah, this is in general a course for Erasmus students, right? So it's specifically made for people who have not grown up in France, to give them a little bit of a background history on French society and history, but always under the lens of philosophy and literature. So we started out with talking about the death penalty. I'm realizing that it's all very light subjects in my courses. And we talked about how different writers responded to the death penalty. Victor Hugo, we spent a lot of time talking about Albert Camus, Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. And my professor said that one of the main aims of this course is really to teach us how to analyze texts well, how to find the theme and the thesis of a text. So that's what we're also going to have to do for the exam. So when he is teaching us, he just constantly goes back and forth between history and philosophy, politics, literature. It's an extremely engaging course. I'm just so happy every time I can sit in there and learn something new. The next course, on the other hand, might be my least favorite course because it's just a French language course. You know, it's a little like, I know I have to do it, but I just find language courses really boring. Even though the professor obviously is doing her best and it's not her fault, it's just that language courses are really dry. I just don't care about grammar. I don't want to hear it. Again, it's a course specifically for Erasmus students who are studying in French. It's like a B2, C1 course, those two levels. And it's good, right? I mean, objectively speaking, it's good for me. I know I should do it. It's a language course. I don't know what else to say. It's a bit boring. Number 8, so the course before last, is called Marginality, Creativity, Criminality. So marginality, I think that's a word, creativity and criminality. And the course is about the relationship between those three, especially in literature. So we started talking about the fact that writers and poets often live on the margins of society, which is why they tend to have a very good view on what's going on, and they are on the margin also because of the fact that they're often geniuses. So there's a sort of paradox there where I think we talked about that either when we talked about Maupassant, or did Maupassant say that? I don't know, like my notes are still all over the place from the first lessons. I was like, just somehow have to write everything down, and there's a bunch of question marks because I don't know if I've heard that correctly, but something came up when we talked about Maupassant where a poet or a writer just has to strike an incredible balance of being visionary on the one hand and holding that vision, being very strong, and fragility on the other hand. So the poet combines strength with softness and detachment and privacy with being seen very deeply. So far we've just read some texts that discuss the relationship between those three states of being or phenomena, let's put it that way. And we've read Baudelaire so far, Maupassant, Balzac, Zola, Dumas, and it's again going to be a course where every student has to prepare a work of literature or art that falls into that vein. And I'm probably going to talk about Dostoevsky and Parasite, this article by Sigmund Freud, which I think just perfectly corresponds to that whole topic. Maybe I'll even make a video about it, as I'm preparing it anyways. So that's it for that course. Let's move on to the last one, which is called L'Italie en France. So Italy in France, and it's all about the influence of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy on French literature. The professor is Italian, and she's gonna read us parts of Dante's Divine Comedy in Italian, which, you know, I love that. And so far we've just learned about Dante's life and his revolutionary act of writing in the Italian vernacular, even though up until that point everything that was written down, especially literature, was all Latin. I'm again gonna have to do a presentation in front of the class, as every student in this class, and I'm gonna have to choose a writer or artist that was in some way influenced by Dante and discuss that influence, compare the two works of art with each other. I'm probably gonna do Borges because I have seen recently a very interesting article talking about the theme of love in Dante and in Borges. So I'd love to research that a little bit more and do my expose about that. I know the course is called Italy in France, and I said that it's the influence on French writers, but the professor, she's very flexible. She was like, choose whatever you want. And she's happy with the topic on Borges. So all I know so far is that besides all the other exposés of the other students, we're also gonna just in general discuss his influence on French writers. So Beckett is gonna come up and Proust. So, you know, even though the Proust course didn't work out, I'm still gonna at least learn something about him. So that sums up everything about the courses I ended up with. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.